Hey guys!
It's Remee
and Shyla,
and welcome back to Inspired at UVic, a podcast for the students by the students.
Which is hosted by Inspire, STEM for Social Impact.
Today we have Emily Arvay with us. She is a learning strategist for the CAL, the Center for Accessible Learning, and an academic coach for the Center of Academic Communication. Did you want to just tell us a little bit about what your job entails and about the students that could possibly work with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to both of you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. My work at CAL as a learning strategist, I meet with students one-on-one who have some form of documented accommodation. So that could be a physical, cognitive, psychiatric, or other form of accommodation. And we just work together over the course of the term, just trying to navigate some of the barriers they're encountering, come up with some good, feasible strategies for academic progress. And it's an absolute delight meeting with students across discipline. And I've been doing that work, I guess, since 2017 now. So it's been a little while. I started working for the CAC, or Center for Academic Communication, in 2019. Started off as a writing center tutor, mainly working with students for whom English is an additional language. So I ran a lot of conversation cafes and pronunciation clinics, and did a lot of written feedback on their assignment drafts. And then more recently, we've expanded the scope of the service offerings over at the CAC to include more academic coaching. So beyond just simply helping out with things related to composing written academic assignments, now we help out with things like time management, goal setting, task perception, motivation, as well as strategies for improving retention, recall, and focus. And, for today's episode of this podcast, we also help with exam preparation.
I think that that's so cool, and so many people don't know that these tools are accessible to them. You can access Emily or a learning strategist like Emily at the Center for Academic Communication for free, if there is availability, of course, or at the Center for Accessible Learning for a fee, which can be funded through a grant if you have a documented disability.
Thanks for that introduction of your position, some general information. Looking ahead for this episode, we're hoping that we'll be able to cover some exam prep to the end of the term for general students.
I feel like when I go into a study session, it's always challenging for me to sit down and know exactly what I want to do. And I feel like there's prep that goes into a study session. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to efficiently prepare for a study session?
That is a great question. I think it really depends student to student. So if someone came in with and disclosed to me that they're having a really hard time approaching studying, maybe there's a lot of material they need to cover, they're not exactly clear on what course concepts might be most important to review. And then maybe there's also some questions around best study practices for them. I would, instead of giving a one-size-fits-all form of advice, I would ask further questions. I would say, first, I think a first step might be to look at the course learning outcomes, and usually those are found at the very beginning of a syllabus. They're usually in the form of statements of, by the end of this course, you will have, right? And it'll list a number of objectives. And so maybe refreshing one's memory about those bigger picture course learning outcomes, and then approaching the review process with those outcomes in mind. So if there's not a really easy way to draw a direct connection from course materials back to those bigger picture learning outcomes, I would say maybe those things are not as important. But if you can see a direct connection back, then maybe those might be the bigger, moments of testing on a final exam. As well, I would ask the student, what times of day do you tend to focus best? Some people are early birds, some people are night owls. If there's no other constraints on your time, like you don't have a part-time job or you don't have a little kid or a family member you're looking after, if you do have the luxury of like wide intervals of time, maybe shuffling things strategically to kind of really leverage the moments in your day where you're cognitively most sharp and able to undertake more challenging forms of work, and safeguarding those periods of the day for the most challenging things, and maybe even incentivizing and rewarding the completion of that challenging work, and thinking through as well, like, where's the best space to do the challenging work? Is it, do you need absolute silence? Do you, like me, like sort of a somewhat busy cafe? So depending on who you are and what best matches with you, I would come at it strategically with what can best support who you are now, rather than some future aspirational self. Like sometimes when I see people saying, "Oh, I'm going to start studying at 6 a.m." I think, but are you? So
yeah, I think I honestly think that's quite revolutionary. I've never looked at a syllabus for the learning outcomes before, and I'm in 4th year engineering. So I don't know, Shyla, have you?
No, I never have. I know for a lot of my classes at the beginning of the semester, like the first day, the professors do go into those learning outcomes, but I've never once really reflected back on that throughout the semester.
I will be doing that this semester for sure.
I'm definitely going to take a look at that. Yeah. Also, just coming back to, you mentioned like the incentives or the reward kind of system after maybe you've completed like a larger chunk of material. Do you have any examples of that? I know, like personally, maybe it's a 5 to 10 minute phone break, but I'm sure that there might be some other reward systems out there.
Oh, sure. I mean, I guess I would only caution people against the 5-minute reward that ends up becoming like a 2-hour, rabbit hole that you fall through. So it can be as simple as, a stick of gum, or like a jog around the block, or cuddling up with your dog, or, these don't have to be costly things. It can be like a fancy latte if you have the spending money, but it can be absolutely free things. It can even be just simply, mentally high-fiving yourself for having done it. But yeah, it doesn't really so much matter what it is, so long as it brings you genuine, authentic joy and happiness, because the idea there is that you, for every, piece of hard work you undertake, that you then couple it with basically a hit of dopamine and serotonin. So whatever that is for you, whether it's smelling a flower, eating, having a little treat, giving someone you love a hug, like whatever that is, to really cement in your mind or cement in your body, really. When I do the hard thing, I get the joy chemicals after.
I feel like some of us don't do that enough, because some of us are maybe studying for 4 hours straight and not giving our brain any rest or anything. One of the tools that I use when I'm studying is I'll like make a very specific to-do list. And I find that like if I put every single small task that I need to do on that and then I check it off, that's one of the ways that I like give myself dopamine. As somebody that has ADHD and lacks dopamine, it's always been like a really big like part of my study process. Do you have any other like suggestions for motivation to do the next thing? Because I know that once you're done one thing, you give yourself a high five, but then getting on to the next can be a challenge as well. Right. After that break or after that, like if you're using the Pomodoro technique, yes, which is the 20 minutes on and 5 minutes off or something like that.
Yeah. I think to get yourself back in the mindset of doing like another sprint, that can be difficult once you've given yourself a little rest to kind of like, okay, here we go again. I maybe even thinking about And again, this depends on student to student, what their own temperament is. But maybe switching up the task types. So as you mentioned, some people do like to have these longer sessions where they're doing hours upon hours of work, keeping their head down and kind of resurfacing after a longer interval. And then for some folks, it can be really wonderful just doing like these short little 20-minute sprints with these 5-minute breaks to keep engagement and keep focus. So I would say, regardless of whether you're like a 3 hours in a row person or 20-minute kind of sprinter, maybe trying to vary the task type so you're not just spending the entire 3-hour chunk reading through course material and then another 3 hours reading. I would say put whatever task types are most challenging in the time where you're best set up to undertake challenging work, but also maybe for some people putting the challenging things first just to get them done, to get them off your cognitive bandwidth and feel that sense of release that you did the most difficult thing first. And then maybe as the day goes on, maybe some people might really benefit from having the day go towards easier and easier things. So that might be one way of building momentum if you happen to find that getting back in is more difficult.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like for any runners out there, you kind of get a runner's high, which is kind of like the same thing that sometimes I get when I start to study and then have like a really full study day. So it's easier as the day goes on and like you kind of just fall down that hill, but in a good way. Roll it maybe, I don't know.
You mentioned previously some students can prefer those longer stretches of time studying while others kind of need that smaller sets of time. Do you think there's any advantages to breaking down your studying into the smaller groups and kind of just focusing on specific tasks for a time-boxed frame?
I do sometimes see, I think that's a wonderful question about which approach for the majority of students might be the most beneficial. I would say that for a lot of students, especially students who tend to have hyper-focused tendencies, right? So they have trouble kind of lifting themselves out of the work and like stopping. I guess the risk there is that they could experience burnout, and especially for those students who may not have a concrete time management plan where they've backwards planned out how they're going to apportion the week or the work they have to do across, say, a week span. It can be hard to know. It can be hard to have a sense of when you can stop and have like a guilt-free break and just, focus on other things to safeguard your mental health, like you're being around people you love and doing other kinds of activities besides being a student. While I don't know that there necessarily is a benefit, like more of a benefit to longer versus shorter stretches, one thing I do recommend to students is making their study sessions match their own natural ability to focus. So, if you find that you can sustain focus easily for an hour, then by all means go ahead and structure your study periods over an hour. If you find that your attention span is far shorter and Pomodoros are working better for you, stick with the Pomodoros. But I would say that, like for every student across the board, it's helpful to have I'm taking off my student hat now. I'm setting it down because I did what I needed to do today, and the things I need to do tomorrow can wait till tomorrow. That's really difficult for a lot of people, but it does really help. Really protect mental and physical well-being for this kind of long distance, to take up that running metaphor, the long distance marathon students do, especially in this month of March.
I get that a lot. I actually took off like 8 months last year just because I'd been in engineering for 3 years and I hadn't taken a single semester off, and that really like broke me down, and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I have to stop. And so that's like a good strategy to maybe avoid that.
Yes. And well, engineering, I have to say, is one of the hardest programs in terms of intensity. And so I would say that, in terms of trends, I see so many engineers in need of like time management, either time management at the beginning of the term where folks are feeling totally overwhelmed with like looking at the work ahead. Or these days, where I have my box of Kleenex on my desk and people come in and they're like, oh, I need triage. I need time management triage. I'm so far behind. I don't know if I'm going to get caught up. Or I just don't know how I'm going to review all the material for the final assessments ahead. And I guess just to pick up on this comment, there is something that is very admirable and to be applauded in terms of knowing when your mental health is under threat and when it's the right moment to take a pause from school. I want to say that most of the academics I know who've gone through and completed, PhDs, most of us have taken a break from school, and I've taken a break from school, like in the middle of the term. Then like, peace out, everybody. I need a break, and there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Yeah, I definitely think that you can't perform in school if your mental health isn't there.
Yeah.
So Emily, kind of with everything that we've talked about, do you have some sources, some apps that could potentially help with rounding up all of the organization, the studying strategies for students?
I do. This is by popular demand. I'm not much of an app person myself, but this question kept coming up from students I would see. So I thought, well, I better learn about this. So in terms of doing things like tracking distractions and maybe managing distractions, there are apps like Smarter Time, Rescue Time, and I think the aptly named Self-Control, where you can track how much you've used, say, your phone or different social media, and you can set timers to adjust, limits on their use. Similarly, there's the Brain Focus Productivity Timer, and you can allocate set times to complete work and take breaks. So that's really good for those Pomodoro sprints if you're a Pomodoro person. I really like this one here called Forest, where it tracks work completion, and every time you complete what you set out to do, it rewards you with plant growth.
That's the one that I use. And if you don't do it, then you have a dead tree in your forest. So you have to do it if you're attached or emotionally attached to those plants,
yes.
like me.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
There's for people who have maybe more how can I say this, dysregulated sleep schedules. The people who developed Forest just came out with something called Sleep Town, and it basically is the same sort of concept, but applied to sleep. And when you wake up in the morning, you have grown yourself a city.
Oh, that's very cool. Because
awesome. Yeah,
when I try to go to sleep at night, I know I'm lying there, and then I'll be like, okay, I'm getting off my phone, and then I always end up picking it up again. So having that me picking it up again, being punished, might be a good idea.
And then for those folks who, I guess, following up on the sleep idea, there's other things to kind of calm and regulate emotions. So there's like this app called Calm, and it provides meditation, sleep stories, and soundscapes at different frequencies. So I've learned a little bit about brown, white, pink, and green noise frequencies. And so experimenting with those can be quite helpful for increasing focus and retention when you're studying for exams.
Yeah, I've heard that can actually really help people with ADHD. Like, I think brown noise is the one that can help people with ADHD focus, because then you're not like listening to the wheels of a skateboard outside, which is just something that we have in our office sometimes.
I think some of those apps that you previously mentioned would help with procrastination as well. What are some other tips that you might have on fighting procrastination?
Procrastination and distraction and motivation and goal setting are all kind of wrapped together. So I think that it can be really helpful to do a little bit of self-reflexive journaling. So when am I procrastinating? How am I procrastinating? Why am I procrastinating? And trying to like get a real hold on all those variables. So am I procrastinating on a specific course, right? Why that course? Why not my other courses? Is it because I don't really see any meaning and purpose in this course? Or, so doing a little bit of investigative work around like where the root of it is. It might even be timing of day, right? Like I'm just procrastinating I always procrastinate in the afternoons. It might be like a timing thing. It might be because the work is hard. It might be because the space isn't conducive to focus, or there's other things that are pulling my attention in another way. But it could also be, so there's external distractions, like things like, our phones. But there are also internal distractions like fear of failure, a sense of like, why am I here? I don't belong here. So it would be helpful if students are procrastinating to kind of do a little bit of that self-reflexive work around where, when, why, and how. And then depending on the answers to that, there's a whole series of different strategies people can enact.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like one of the reasons that I procrastinate is fear of failure, because it's so much, in my mind, when I'm looking at a semester, it's so much easier to fail if you're not trying hard, and then that's the reason. But once I have failed a course and I look back and I'm like, oh, I really wish I had have tried harder. It would have been so much easier to fail if I had known that I had done everything I could, because then I wouldn't be spending $600 in a full semester on something that I didn't put the effort in to learn, and have myself fail because I tried everything I could and it was just too hard. And I can blame it on the professor. So. I can be like, that prof sucked, but I didn't. So
I find like when I work with students, when we get into more internal forms of distraction, like fear of failure, it can be really helpful for the student to come up with the thing that they can say to that part of themselves that fears failure, right? And so that's very unique for every person. But for myself, because I too like have that tendency to have those thoughts and to procrastinate because of not wanting to do something incorrectly, or not wanting to, especially like disappoint others. I think a lot of fear of failure is like living up to the expectation of others. So the little mantra that works for me, but again, it's everyone has to create their own, is I'm just going to try to do the best I can with the time and energy and knowledge I have now. And I like my little mantra because sometimes I don't have time, sometimes I don't have energy, sometimes I don't have like extensive knowledge or, variations of all three of those things. But you just kind of try to work with what you have, give it your best shot, and that's all you can do, right?
Yeah, and something I think I've learned over the course of my years at UVic is when you put something down on paper, most of the time you're going to get more than 60%. So you're already passing. So as long as you're handing something in, it's better than not handing something in. So maybe that fear of failure doesn't have to be so scary.
Yeah, bring that bar down.
Just to kind of touch back what you're talking about, Remee, for me personally, I kind of get so caught up on that fear of failure that it kind of disables my procrastination. So I guess that kind of just goes to show how different everybody can be.
Yeah, we really chose the two very opposite learners for this podcast, which is also very interesting because we're going to get both sides of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that we can probably wrap it up. We hope that this helped everybody out there listening. We will link some tools in the show notes and make sure that we can lead you to where you need to go. Thank you, Emily. That was amazing.
Thank you both. I am so delighted to be on the podcast and wishing all the students out there the best on their finals. You got this.
Thanks for listening to our podcast with Emily.
The entire crew at Inspire all hope you guys have a great day. See you next time.